It's 7 minutes after the hour, 7 o'clock. As you know, we got a bunch of stuff at the legislature that we really pay a lot of attention to, and then some stuff gets footballed around, and it's sometimes a mockery gets made of it. First of all, we want to welcome to the building, as usual on Monday morning during the session, Minority Leader Aaron Johanson. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
I was saying just before you got here, and actually I'm really glad because I do know that a lot of times the media, and I'm part of the media, you'll take a part of something and go run with it, and it becomes sort of, it gets its own entity, you know?
It develops its own life.
Yeah, and I don't think that this bill that everybody's talking about, the prostitution exemption, is the police station wanting to have sex with a lot of prostitutes at all. However, that's the way it's being portrayed nationally, and we're not looking so good. Can you tell me what you think about this and what the debate seems to be?
Sure. You know, interestingly enough, it's gotten so much more attention than it ever got. It's gotten so much more attention now in the Senate than it ever had in the House. Mm-hmm. It briefly came up, and people were aware of it because I remember this exemption being talked about. Mm-hmm. But now it's sort of this full-blown story.
Yeah.
And I think the heart of the issue is, and what's on everybody's mind, is how do we best protect the public from crime? Mm-hmm. And, when the rub, when you hear it between the police and other advocates who oppose getting rid of this exemption, mm-hmm. is just they differ in whether or not it's necessary
sure.
in order to basically bust people in that trade.
But one of the things it said, and maybe this has come up, and maybe it's why. Well, so first of all, there's a lot of lawyers in the legislature, and a lot of people understand that the bad guys have sometimes more tools than the good guys, mm-hmm. so that they really need to do a prima facie evidence case to get a conviction. But then you cross that line of morals, right? I mean, what's right?
Yeah, and I mean, both sides have some compelling arguments.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear other national experts saying that this exemption doesn't exist elsewhere in different jurisdictions, somehow they manage to be able to
get their convictions,
this kind of crime. Yeah. But at the same time, you also hear from the police department that lots of criminals are very intrepid about knowing exactly what they can and cannot get away with, and how to develop greater and better tests to discover an undercover police officer.
Wouldn't, Aaron, the real good example of this be, and maybe you've even had this in your district, where somebody says, I'm sick and tired of calling cops. There's a nice house on our street. We keep calling them, and they keep coming up with lame excuses why they're still going on. I don't think they're lame excuses at all. I think that what happens is it's true. We've had lots of cops in here, and I know that you've had a lot of testimony at the legislature where you really, really need to dot your I's and cross your T's, because the defense guys mm-hmm. can get somebody off unless you can really slam dunk the case.
Yeah. And there are a lot of criminals that are very smart, intrepid people, very strategic, and know what they're doing
mm-hmm.
in order to flout the law. And so, the police are constantly having to stay one step ahead.
Well, another thing came up, and this is an interesting thin ice area too. That do cops have to do crack or ice or marijuana or heroin to bust down drug dealers? Because and I'm sure that you've been told and you've investigated on your own that getting somebody undercover is no easy task. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of trust and everything, and sometimes I guess you got to be one of them in order to get in with them. I mean, it must be a tough thing.
Yeah, and it's always a gray area. I mean, I think thinking about the greater good mm-hmm. and how to keep Hawaii safe. Yeah. I mean, it's not a job I frankly think that I could be able to do. So I respect those who do it.
I agree. I said that when we're all little kids, everybody wants to be a fireman or policeman or soldier or something. Mm-hmm. But when you find out what they really have to do every day, it's kind of difficult. Okay. However, this thing is still milling around. It still has legs on it. What is it? Is it out of the House?
So it's definitely out of the House, and it was out of the House a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Where it is now is it's in the Senate, and it's very likely from Chairman He's comments that he will strip out that exemption. So it'll probably move through the Senate without the exemption, and then in conference committee, the House and the Senate will have to reconcile.
Yeah, interesting that the police department, he said, for either embarrassment or disdain for the committee, just didn't show up.
Because they were there in the House Judiciary Committee meeting.
Is it a fine line, like I was saying? I mean, are there other things in the legislation that are beneficial so that they can get their job done without actually having to have physical content? Or is that what most of us don't understand? It is gray, and there probably has to be some physical contact to make a case stick.
I don't know that there necessarily has to be physical contact, but I think the premise for HPD is, in conversations they have to be able to sort of go up to that line. That if the exemption is taken away, they're unclear of whether they can even be involved in the solicitation.
Yeah, there was one story that just before you got here that we read about. Maybe it would be that you would have to have the services performed by the prostitute before you pay them, so you could. And I thought, how unlikely that's going to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the case, but again, I'm not an attorney. I leave it to the more capable people to figure those out.
Okay, now I do know that sometimes when we look at some of these things, they're the glamour issues, they're the big they're the big wow factor things. I'm wondering though that as we get closer and closer, if some of the things that we are working on in there that have more of a cost, just out of curiosity, I don't know if you had a chance, but earlier this morning I was talking about some numbers that are coming out nationally about, say, how expensive breakfast is. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about trying to reduce the cost of living. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing all of a sudden bacon is the darling of the fast food industry, and bacon's expensive. Mm-hmm. And so parents going through a drive-through line are going to want to find out, how can I spend $3 less a day than I am right now because I can't afford my taxes going up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just speaks to the fact that increasingly both residents of Hawaii as well as Americans in general continue to pay a higher and higher cost of living, and with fewer and fewer dollars.
One thing that is looming, and I would imagine that needs to be taken a look at, is the minimum wage. I mean, we're not certain. Once again, it looks like, didn't that measure pass out of the House?
It did. So both the House and the Senate are considering their own version. So essentially, you're getting.
You're looking at theirs now.
Yeah. We're looking at the Senate version, and they're looking at ours. So you're sort of getting minimum wage in in surround sound, because you keep hearing it from both sides of the chambers. But
it's interesting though, Aaron, that not only are we hearing it, but we're hearing it nationally too. Mm-hmm. So it's not just
Oh, sure.
The
most
minimum
definitely
wage is under the gun right now.
Yeah. And it's sort of the concert item of most of the political class right now.
What about the feedback? I mean, in your district, do you hear both pros and cons on this?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, I have folks who work in the hotel industry. I have folks who are making minimum wage, and certainly they typically tend to be in favor of it. I also have a lot of small business owners who say, when I pay the Hawaii Prepaid Healthcare Act premiums, that's already factored into my cost of a worker, and almost no one else as an employer throughout the nation is having to pay that. So when you add that into what would be the minimum wage, I'm already paying well above what you folks, being the legislature, would raise the minimum wage to, because there's so many hidden costs that employers have to pay.
Yeah, I mean, and that
per worker.
Part of that hidden cost is our own, invasive tax system. This 4% that we think is 4% is not really 4 at all.
Yeah.
Okay, when we come back after this short little break, we got a couple of more things that are really, really front page, and most of them are somehow umbilical to your wallet. And a reminder, I'm getting some email, but we'd much rather talk to you on the phone. That's the only way we'll do it, as a matter of fact. And the number's 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467 here on The Answer.
Mike Buck on AM 690. The Answer.
Feeling hot, hot, hot.
Oh, yeah, feeling hot, hot, hot. It's on the front page. Well, if it's in the legislature in the big square building, we're talking about it. Your chance to join the conversation. Aaron Johanson is in the house. And that's sort of a double meaning, because he's actually in the house. In our house, too. So anyway, we're just before the break. We got a lot of things to cover, but I want to go back to the minimum wage thing for a bit, because I remember in a lot of respects, a lot of people in the restaurant business are in the minimum wage. And there's always been this gray area about tipping and everything else. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people that are saying, it's such an honorable profession. A good waiter, a good server makes a good, decent amount of money because his customers take care of him. But that's not true in a lot of places, is it? I mean, there are a lot of restaurants where tipping is is minimum or negligible.
Yeah, and the tips are certainly great when you're serving an expensive meal, but
Sure.
if you're a server in an inexpensive place, you're 20% or 15 if somebody's
Yeah,
giving
but
15 or 10 is,
but even that though, Aaron. I mean, even though you see more and more people now, I think Starbucks has got an app that you can tip prior to even picking up your takeout and these kind of things. When some people see a tip jar at a fast food place, they think it's a joke because they think, what work are you doing? I mean, I want a number 3. The guy, just give me the number 3.
It's definitely a difficult industry to be in, and the one that's underappreciated.
What are some of the other things though?
Well, what I was going to say is interesting is how the idea is morphing. At least, we've now heard it multiple times in the House, and now we're hearing the Senate bill. And what's interesting is, we inserted the House contents into it, but spread it out over 4 years.
Right.
So,
which lowered the burden but didn't eliminate it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to describe it. And it's something that I mentioned specifically because I think if small businesses keep up the pressure, they will find that they may not love the idea that comes out ultimately of the legislature, but they might find it a little more palatable. So important to keep up that pressure and to let people, especially legislators, know and those who are in charge of these committees that it's not that philosophically people are opposed to paying higher wages. It's just that one's got to do it in a market-based free enterprise kind of context.
There's another big concern that's almost sort of linked with this minimum wage, and that is the either success or lack thereof of affordable health, and particularly with the Hawaii connector. It's kind of embarrassing when you find out how much money has been spent and how many people it's helped. And I know that there's a lawsuit now going on about it. Our Lonesome Sam senator has filed a lawsuit about this. What's the general feeling in the House right now about the success or lack thereof of the Hawaii connector, and why is it even going on? It's not working.
Yeah, there's a palpable frustration, to be completely honest, I think, among all 51 members, and that's something everyone is united on for different reasons. But unfortunately,
we have some common ground here in the unhappiness with this program.
Yeah, I mean, I think some people philosophically felt like it wasn't going to necessarily work because it just wasn't a market-based approach. But that's more a comment sometimes on the way the federal government designed it rather than the way the state sort of implemented it. But I think there's also frustrations significantly with the way it's been implemented and rolled out. It's difficult for people to sign up, so they're not only experiencing the same technical frustrations that everybody else
on the
is,
mainland.
But our one significant difference, and it's a really sad one, it's one where Hawaii actually has been a leader but is now kind of a victim of its own success, is that
we were okay before this thing.
There isn't a critical mass of uninsured people signing up enough to make this thing sustainable and give it its own critical mass. And we literally, I remember hearing the head of the Health Connector testify before the Finance Committee.
Saying that we're broken. Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, and he basically said, we're so successful and we have such a low uninsured rate that we don't have enough people to sign up for this Health Connector to make it sustainable.
Yeah, but meanwhile, when you take a look at the big number, it's $250 million in Hawaii for something that we didn't need. Well, I mean, multiply that by 50 states. We got a nightmare here.
The state sort of missed the boat. That there's something called an innovation waiver, which is what the state could have applied for to say, look, we're not one of the broken systems with a high rate of uninsured people in the state, so give us a break, federal government and HHS. But they didn't apply for that, so the next time they can apply for it is, I think, 2017, and so now everybody's struggling to sort of, how are we going to keep this thing sustainable to comply with the federal law since we took the money till we can apply for this waiver to basically say we're so successful we don't need this.
Here's one thing. I got we're going to go to the telephones here with a question about minimum wage, but before we do that, this is the 4th anniversary of the implementation of Obamacare. There's been no measure nationally in our country's history that's taken as long to implement. That just simply means there's still resistance. So much resistance that it almost has to be overhauled to make it.
Well, and you can tell that there are so many complications on the federal level because every few months the implementation schedule and
the kick down the road.
Yeah, the way the law is being implemented literally changes by executive fiat.
And the costs associated with that are horrible. Mark in Mililani joins us. We go back, talk about this minimum wage, which, believe it or not, folks, affects just as many people as Obamacare does. Mark, thanks for waiting. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Real quick, I was just thinking it would be refreshing that one of these sessions, everybody that's making these rules and legislation would come up with the idea of everything that's on the books right now. How can we refine it and trim it down and get rid of the fat on it, instead of what can we spend this month or this coming season? How much money can we get from the taxpayer? And minimum wage would go down. Minimum wage is only systemic to the cost of the government doing business. If the government slows down on their spending, minimum wage is not going to have. That's not going to be an issue. You can go out and buy your plate lunch.
Mark, that's a great point, and there are two things that I've advocated before. We have 2 years in each biennium, and I wish we just spent 1 year cleaning up laws, repealing things that were outdated, and looking at taxes, quite frankly, that don't need to be applied, fees that are no longer necessary, and actually being able to do exactly what you just said in half of the 2-year cycle. I also advocated for something that they do in some other states like Texas, which is called a Sunset Review Commission. It's set up. It's a bipartisan group, and it's more than just the legislature, but it's set up specifically to look at what needs to be repealed and refined and redone in government so that the recommendations are already ready for the legislative body each session.
I understand, but like you just mentioned on that money they got in for Obamacare, it's I think what it is the mindset is what can we get? What kind of monies are we looking at? How can we increase the general fund? Oh, here comes a big chunk of money. Let's do that, instead of saying no, we don't need that money. They should have been on that when it came down the pike. No, we're a state that's thinking about the taxpayer, and we want things to run properly here. We got it together. Mm-hmm. But instead, we're no different from those with their hands out on the mainland.
You're right. I agree.
What's interesting, Mark, and I've often said this, and I'm sure you feel the same way. At your own family level, you would have made a mandatory adjustment way before 4 years later, right?
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so why aren't we treating the round table down there at the big square building like we do a family meeting?
Well, that's something. That's a conundrum. I can never understand why. Yeah. I just don't know. I have no answer to that.
Well, thanks for your participation, and keep a stiff upper lip.
Thanks, Mark.
I think that he reflects the views of everybody, Republican and Democrat. In other words, runaway spending is runaway spending, no matter who instigated it.
Yep.
Okay, so now
and large unsustainable government programs are also, same. Everybody's got to deal with them, the good and the bad.
You brought up something pretty interesting, though, because remember a couple of weeks ago I was asking you about some states that have legislatures that convene every other year, because they just either are squared away or they just don't want to spend the money on what it costs to run a session. If we did have one session that was, okay, gang, this is roll up your sleeve session. We're going to look at what we've done instead of what we need to do. We're going to go backwards and get some stuff off the books.
Yeah, and I think one of the fundamental problems in paradigms that dominates the Hawaii state legislature is that activity and output is a measure of success. It's not necessarily the quality of activity, it's the quantity of activity. So, we actually introduce, the 76 of us that make up the House and the Senate, we introduce, in terms of sheer volume of bills, more than any other state legislature.
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad you said that, because somebody did the other day, it's actually in a campaign document that I got to bring it in and show you. And they're proud of it. I introduced blank bills last year. And that means like, wow, you must be really for us because you introduced all these bills. Some of those bills get thrown out with the bathwater, right? I mean, before they even get in.
They never get heard, and what's more, it makes what we're looking at so much more diffuse, because you're looking at several thousand bills instead of these are the major fundamental themes the state is facing, and these are the things we're going to choose to focus our efforts on.
What about when you find redundancy within either government programs or within government itself? In other words, departmental redundancies.
There's a lot of them. It's usually sort of, unfortunately for the taxpayer, it's usually sort of serendipitous, where somebody asks a few questions and then you have this aha epiphany moment of, wait, why does that exist? What? People are doing what? That's not a statutory responsibility? Huh.
Yeah.
And then you see a bill that maybe repeals it.
Yeah, and then they come up with, hey, I got a great idea. Let us commission a commission. Let's put together a study. Let's get a department. Let's hire a staff, and we'll work this out.
Or a consultant or a contractor.
Hey, we got plenty more to come, including your opportunity to join us. The number's 296 KHNR. That's 296-5467. But okay, so what's the deal? You just toss it up in the air and see what sticks on the ceiling, you know? Anyway, we got a lot stuck on the ceiling and a lot of ground to cover on what's going on in the current session and how it affects you. We talked a little bit in the last segment about the minimum wage and had an interesting call. And I'd be interested in more of you with small business. And you can be anonymous talking with me and Aaron about that, because I think that as we get examples, and I know that you're getting examples because you said so from some of your small business people, that it is possible for somebody to show, look, legislature, this is what this move is going to cost my business. And my only alternative is either to not expand or put up my prices or do something that's going to make me even less competitive than I am already.
Well, and I'll tell you, small businesses are often not given credit for many of them pay higher than minimum wage. Everyone assumes that the small business is the bad actor who's going to pay only what they're mandated to pay by law, but that's just not simply the case. A lot of the market rate for a lot of talent, irrespective of the function, is a lot higher than minimum wage. So
let me really be able to underline that on your behalf, and everybody who's wondering. Many people know, Aaron, that I grew up in the retail business in Waikiki. And at one time, having more than 20 stores and hundreds of employees, we were very appealing looking for, at that time, the retail clerks union from the mainland came over here, and they really were trying to get established in Hawaii. And almost everybody in Waikiki, anyway, laughed at what they were going to offer people, because in order to be competitive and to get good people working in your stores, you had to pay them well. Because if you didn't, they went to work for your competitor and you lose. So isn't that like a free market system, and isn't that what works?
Yes. I mean, and it's what takes into account, that's one of the reasons that capitalism is a successful economic model. It takes into account the basic sort of human nature that I'm going to do what is best for me. And so if there's the same job at someplace else and it pays more, why would I not do that? I think unfairly small business is saddled with this expectation that they're just trying to cut corners everywhere, and that bears out on the worker. In fact, I think a lot of our small businesses are really great actors who not only keep the economy going from floundering here in the islands, but also really just try to be a good team-oriented model that pays their workers well and fairly.
It also seems to me, and I know this is argumentative, arguable, I should say, but is it my imagination, or do we here in Hawaii have a larger percentage of small businesses than maybe other places? I don't know if it's true, but I do know that it is often said that the backbone of Hawaii's economy is small business.
No, it's very true. Very true. We're much more dependent on small businesses here than other states. Maybe
because we're not industrial manufacturers.
Yeah,
our garment industry is pretty good, but other than that, but that also cries for what is the Ledge doing this year to encourage investment in Hawaii by larger businesses that are on the mainland. I mean, our picture is painted right now as a business unfriendly state. How do we get over that?
I think the legislature's sometimes magic panacea towards helping out the business community instead of reducing costs, which I think would probably be the more successful market-based approach. But sometimes, my colleagues don't share that opinion. So instead of reducing costs, what they typically do is explore tax credits. So there's manufacturing tax credits, renewable energies tax credits, all kinds of tax credits that passed out of at least the House when I last saw it. Now, I'm not sure whether or not those tax credits will survive because, there's a lot of hotel industry tax credits and tourism industry tax credits as well. But I'm not sure, given the new Council on Revenue's projections, that those tax credits will survive as we continue throughout the session.
One thing that came up this year, and I do know that there's been statistical data supplied by the solar industry about the decrease in number of new permits being pulled for a lot of reasons about photovoltaic systems. That there are a lot of people banging on the door and begging to extend or create new tax credits for solar. But yet there are also some people, and maybe you can give us both sides of this, that say, wait a minute, the homeowner is being pretty greedy. They want a tax credit, but they're also going to save a ton of money, and it's documentable. Why should they be given a tax credit up front when their investment is going to pay off for them statistically without the possibility of failing?
Well, I think what's interesting is that is often the juxtaposition of the two sides. A lot of people, because the investment is so significant up front, a lot of people don't necessarily recoup their investment, even with the offsetting tax credits, for
good
quite a while.
salesmanship is telling you different than that. But when you really get the facts, it may not be quite as much of a savings compared to the investment.
Right. When I've talked to people on the ground, sometimes neighbors and friends, those kinds of folks, you don't find that everybody says, "Oh, I'm automatically recouped my investment already," and it's within that time frame that the salespeople say. So that's one fact. But I think too, what is so frustrating for a lot of people is that so many areas are at 100 or greater than 100% saturation according to HECO.
Right.
What we really need, and again, it's interesting because we brought up the market so much this morning, but this is a prime example of when there is one monopoly utility and you don't have a ton of competition, you don't have sometimes the real impetus for infrastructure upgrades, which allow for greater rates of PV expansion and renewable energy utilization. So you have a lot of areas where people just can't build PV anymore or install it because
it certainly
PECO
is.
just can't take it, they say.
But it certainly is a no-brainer with regards to solar hot water systems. I mean, they do pay for themselves. Right. It is documented, and there's some that are saying they're no longer the darling of the tax credit.
Correct.
So we have to create a new. But one of the big things that I think, and this is probably maybe the real big thing, there is a coalition of movement in Alaska and in Hawaii about the Jones Act, and I know that's it's probably one of the least understood measures there is. There seems to be a lot more traction for it right now. What are your thoughts on the debate on how it's going on and what the likely outcome is, at least at the House this year?
Mm-hmm. Well, that would end up taking place at Congress more than it would here, but certainly because
it needs the support
local
from here,
interests.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a united consensus on the Jones Act here in Hawaii. There's certainly those who advocate that it would reduce the cost of living, and there are also those who advocate that for national security interests, it's best to make sure that things are made here and shipped here rather than relying on sort of
I've been a strong proponent of that argument for a long time, but I also can tell you that we're not making ships anywhere anyway to any numbers. In other words, some of our companies here, in order to expand, have no alternative but to buy ships made somewhere else. So it is, but I think, once again, we've always thought in Hawaii that we're the tail getting wagged by the dog, but the tail's pretty strong now. I mean, there sort of is a coalition in Guam and certainly in Alaska and in Hawaii for people saying, well, at least it should be exempt for us.
Yeah, so how it might play out is there might be some expression of, if there were any, there would be some expression of support probably by maybe a resolution or something within the House or the Senate,
which would
urging
be
Congress to do something.
Yes, support. In other words, urging for them to approve or not approve.
And I'm not sure that even has necessarily critical mass of support in the legislative bodies in the Hawaii state.
Yeah, and that being said, if it weren't a clear-cut support, wouldn't anybody in D.C. saying, well, even the people there are mixed opinion on this?
Yeah. I'm not sure that anybody, say, in our 4-person congressional delegation is going to be advocating for amendment to the Jones Act.
Well, I think that in the respect that Senators Akaka and Inouye were never swayed from their position on it. They had never indicated disapproval or support for a waiver. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, maybe they have, but it certainly wasn't very high profile. 296 KHNR is the number. That's 296-5467. We still have another segment to spend with Representative Aaron Johanson, and there are plenty of things that are still on the front burner that do need your assistance with regards to participation. We'll remind you again how that works and how important it is.
Mike Buck, all Honolulu, all the time. On AM 690, The Answer.
Yep, things are coming to a boil in the big square building. Okay. We talked a little bit about minimum wage. We talked a little bit of Obamacare. We talked a little bit about superfluous government departments. And we talked a little bit about the Jones Act. And joining us on that is somebody that not only knows about the Jones Act, but about a lot of things about renewable energy. And this is our engineer friend, Alan, out in Lanikai, Representative Johanson. Alan, good morning. You want to talk a little bit about the Jones Act, I understand.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, Alan. Good morning.
Hello?
Yeah, hello. I said hello, and you said hello. Alan.
Hi. Am I on
Hi,
here?
Alan.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, there you go. Rep. Johanson is ready to hear what you have to say. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. Thank you for coming down. Anyway, on the Jones Act, Senator Noye did give us an exemption for the inter-island cruise ship. What is that, the Pride of Hawaii or Pride of America? That ship was built in Europe. And all we need is a similar, shall we say, exemption so we can build one or two LNG carriers that will allow us to bring natural gas from Coos Bay, Oregon, to Hawaii, or from Alaska to Hawaii. And
in other words, our stuff, but not our ship.
Right. In other words, the ships, like the cruise liner, would be American registry, American accrued, American owned, and everything. We just need that one exemption because they have not built an LNG carrier in the U.S. since 1970. And
could we build one?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole point is that until recently, we were not in a position to export LNG, liquid natural gas. Natural gas was brought into the East Coast from the Emirates. This has been an ongoing thing for a long time. But the new kid on the block is the new drilling technology allows the U.S. to be a natural gas exporter, and immediately that opens up things for Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico that did not exist in the past, and so there wasn't any need for to build ships for interstate commerce in the past.
Okay, we'll get Rep. Johanson to talk about that, but let's make sure that we're not saying this is it, because what about the guy that says, well, what about a cruise boat? And what about the guy that says, well, what about just a regular general freight boat, a container ship?
Well, Matson has been buying U.S. built ships for the Jones Act reasons, but a regular freighter is a much more common hull design than a LNG carrier, which is a very unique ship.
Interesting stuff, Aaron.
Yeah, and I think it's great to have you call in, Alan, because clearly you've got a lot of technical expertise, and it would be helpful if Hawaii were receiving things like liquefied natural gas, because it would augment our portfolio and give us some more diversified options, and I think it would ultimately reduce the cost
there are
of living.
two big advantages. One is cost.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the new drilling techniques, LNG is much cheaper than crude oil, and the second one is LNG is far and away the cleanest of
Mm-hmm.
all the fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
If we're concerned about general environmental protection, LNG is in a class by itself, and this is a tremendous opportunity that we don't want to forego.
I agree.
Yeah, Alan, thanks so much. And piggybacking on that, also, Aaron, would be the fact that we're looking right now at another major oil spill. I mean, every time you see a seabird doused in sludge and this thing out, you realize that natural gas is that can't happen with natural gas.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem that has swung the pendulum 100% either.
Yeah, I think Alan makes some great points, and I think because of the types of points that Alan is making, there are more and more people who are open to considering it than there were previously. But I just don't get the sense, because it's not typically what most of my colleagues are talking about. That's
well, you know what? He did bring up one interesting thing, and that was the little bend that Danny Noe did do about the cruise line. But remember also that there was that point in time when the cruise liner, in order to be going inter-island, had to go all the way to Kiribati and back. I mean, the huge expensive fuel and nothing to see in between.
I also think that sometimes Senator Inouye was in his own special class where it may not necessarily have been the political will of many of the folks that he affiliated with, but because he was sort of, just him, he got to get away with things that I don't know that.
Wasn't that a good example, though? I mean, look at the stuff
Yeah.
that he and Ted Stevens did collaboratively,
Yeah.
and they certainly weren't of the same political ilk.
Yeah,
You know?
it was. And, unfortunately, that kind of cooperation is less prevalent in D.C. right now.
Okay, now, if that is said, one of the statements came out by the power company the other day was what they hope to do on LNG. Where'd they get it? Where would they get theirs from?
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
see those statements, but ostensibly they'd have to get it, through a means that Alan just mentioned.
Okay, now I want to make sure that we end up today with the importance of what's going on right now on a specific basis. I always give you the opportunity to tout what you guys are doing this week and where you can use input, and certainly where you can use people either coming to testify or by submitting testimony because you need it.
Yeah. Well, what you're seeing this week is there's always kind of a lull, and right now, I think both the House and the Senate are considering resolutions, and although resolutions are not as strong as a law, they're not necessarily binding. They're still expressions and affirmations of what the legislature thinks is important, and sometimes before something can become a law, before a study is done or before something is changed, sometimes the resolution is the precursor. So, we're going through the round of resolution hearings, as well as the Senate's still looking at the budget. They'll make their own revisions. The money committees, both Finance and Ways and Means in the Senate, will start to hear sort of these final round bills, because basically 2 weeks from now will be our next swap where we give each other back our bills.
Then it's really down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah, then it's just conference committee and ironing out the last.
Okay,
details.
now one of the things that you just said was were the rezos, and in the same breath, when you take a look at the budget, we've seen another massage of the Council of Revenue's downturning.
Right.
This must send a very clear mandate to everybody in Ways and Means and administration. The budget's not going to work. We need to do some changing.
Yeah, I think it certainly. We passed it out of the Finance Committee before the Council on Revenues met and revised downward, but that was already the trajectory the House was on, and I suspect, given Senator Ige's fiscal stewardship, he is likely to also reduce it downwards as well, because he now has the benefit of this information. And so, and I think you're starting to see even the governors having to acquiesce to that, because he called, and it was a revision downward, but he still called the House budget, something that was responsible, and he gave it some praise. Which if you're gonna dig your
what a
heels
concept.
in, if you're gonna dig your heels in, you're not gonna praise somebody who just reduced the budget. So I think that you'll see that the budget, out of sheer necessity, has to come more in line with the fiscal realities that we're facing.
Okay, now the other thing that I wanted to briefly talk about today, because I was mentioning to you off the air, I saw the huge throng of people that attended the KCC Farmers Market on Saturday. And I do know that a lot of our farmers here are organic, and they sell their organic stuff. And there was a couple of people I saw with GMO signs. And I'm wondering, this I know is still a big issue, particularly on some of the neighbor islands. Do you think there's anything definitive coming out about GMO labeling, or just plain in the whole GMO category in this session?
It seems like the issue has somewhat fizzled, at least at the legislature. Last week, our agricultural chair in the House tried to, and she was very open about trying to gut and replace a bill and turn it into GMO labeling, but she ended up having to defer it. I don't think it had the collective will to pass out of the committee. So it just doesn't seem as though there are a ton of GMO labeling measures coming out, despite the fact that there's a significant population of people who I think are clamoring for something to do with GMO. You
know what I think is interesting, and this is on a national level. There are any number of legislative moves underfoot to redefine what a manufacturer must put on a label, how it has to be accurate, how it must say right off the bat, number of servings in this package and things like that, because we've been lulled in a sense of false security with some of the labeling, even when you don't even think about GMO labeling, just regular labeling.
Yeah, and I think as more savvy consumers and a more health conscious society, people want more and more information, irrespective, like you said, of whether it's just GMO or just general caloric intake or health or ingredient issues. And I honestly think one of the easiest ways to tackle it is just to do it at the federal level so that everybody can comply.
Let me ask you this, because we have at least a generation in between us. Okay, I was reluctant, lax, and only I would say in the last decade have I really ever read any of those labels. I must tell you, though, sometimes when I read them now, I pick up something that I want to buy and I see the first ingredient is sugar, I put it right back down. Do you and your family pay attention to labels?
I do. Yeah.
See?
I do. It makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Like you, I used to be a little bit heavier myself.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I
That's
pay
right.
attention
We're
to
both reformed.
calories and a whole bunch of other things.
But I mean, I can't tell you the number of people here in Hawaii that they're saying, oh, wait, I got to go in the store and I got to grab some juice for the kids. And they come out with a half a gallon or a gallon container of things that have maybe 10% juice in it.
Yeah.
So we're really not paying
Sugar
attention
water.
to that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So but don't you think, like a lot of other things, it only is a matter of time before all of these things are going to be done that way?
I suspect so.
Yeah.
I just think consumers are becoming more and more savvy.
Well, we have got, I would say, playing a little hot stuff going on. Aaron, thanks very much. I look forward next week.
Thanks,
we get closer and closer to that other crossover.
That's right. Yep.